A brilliant young lawyer loses the most important case of his career, and it's precisely that defeat that leads him to abandon it all and become one of the greatest doctors of the Church. This is Saint Alphonsus Liguori, celebrated by the Church on August 1. Born near Naples in 1696, Alphonsus earned a doctorate in law while still a teenager and practiced as a lawyer for about 8 years, until a courtroom defeat in 1723 accelerated a discernment that had already been quietly building inside him. Ordained a priest in 1726, he devoted himself to preaching, hearing confessions, and serving the poor across the urban and rural areas of the Kingdom of Naples, organizing evening chapels where prayer, catechesis, and community life were led even by lay people. In 1732, he founded the Congregation of the Most Holy Redeemer, the Redemptorists, to evangelize populations everyone else had abandoned. Named a bishop in 1762, he reformed the clergy and promoted missions despite serious health problems that never really left him. His moral theology sought to avoid both a rigorism that leads to despair and a permissiveness that misleads people, placing mercy and responsible formation at the center of ministry. Alphonsus is the patron of confessors and moralists, and his life teaches that a great defeat can actually be the clearest invitation God has ever given us. On this same day, the Church also remembers a much older episode, the extreme faithfulness of the 7 Brothers Maccabees, their mother, and Saint Eleazar, Jewish martyrs from the Old Testament. Their martyrdom took place during the persecution of Antiochus IV Epiphanes, around 167 BC, when the king tried to force practices incompatible with the law of Israel. According to the Book of Maccabees, Eleazar was an elderly, respected scribe forced to eat forbidden pork. He refused even the suggestion to merely pretend obedience, because that gesture alone might scandalize the younger generation watching him. He chose to die leaving a real example of faithfulness instead. Shortly after, 7 brothers were tortured and executed in front of their own mother, for that same reason. One of them declared, "We are ready to die rather than transgress the laws of our fathers." And their mother, instead of begging them to give in, encouraged each son with the hope that the Creator, who gave life in the first place, could also give it back after death. She died last, having watched every one of her sons go before her. For early Christians, this family became a witness to the resurrection, centuries before Christ himself. And the lesson they leave is radical: something exists that matters more than life itself, staying faithful until the very end. By the 16th century, a young peasant would share a student room with 2 future saints, without ever imagining what that friendship would become. This is Saint Peter Faber, born in 1506 in a small village in Savoy, and who died in Rome on that same August 1, 1546. The son of peasants, Peter managed to reach the University of Paris, where he shared a room with Francis Xavier and met Ignatius of Loyola, becoming the very first priest ordained among the small group that would go on to found the Society of Jesus. On August 15, 1534, he celebrated the Mass at Montmartre, where the companions took vows of poverty, chastity, and mission. After that, Peter crossed Europe repeatedly in service of the Pope. He worked in Germany, Italy, Spain, Portugal, and the Netherlands, guiding retreats based on the spiritual exercises and seeking to respond to the Protestant Reformation through friendship and inner renewal rather than confrontation. He was appointed a theologian for the Council of Trent, but died exhausted, at only 40 years old, shortly after reaching Rome. In his personal writings, he left a line that sums up his entire trust in God: "It is the Lord who does all things in us." Peter is remembered by Jesuits and spiritual directors, and his life teaches that a sincere friendship, in the right place, can change the course of history itself. Going back a few centuries, now to 10th century England, a monk would become one of the great reformers of religious life across the entire country. The Church also celebrates today Saint Athelwold of Winchester, born between 904 and 909, and who died on August 1, 984. Seeking a stricter monastic life, Athelwold went to Glastonbury Abbey, then governed by St. Dunstan. In 955, the king named him Abbot of Abingdon, a house he rebuilt materially and spiritually from the ground up. Consecrated Bishop of Winchester in 963, he replaced relaxed clerical communities with disciplined monks, and helped restore important monasteries like Ely and Peterborough, always with the direct support of King Edgar. His work formed part of what became known as the English Benedictine Reform, a movement that profoundly reorganized religious life across medieval England. Athelwold also sponsored manuscripts and education, contributing directly to the cultural renewal known as the Winchester School. Old sources record a firm temperament and demanding discipline, but also genuine care for the poor around him. He's remembered as a reformer of monks and a promoter of Christian culture, and his life teaches that rebuilding something broken, with patience and discipline, is itself a real form of holiness. In 19th-century Vietnam, two priests of completely different ages and vocations would face the same persecution together. Saint Dominic Nguyen Van Han and Saint Bernard Vu Van Du, celebrated by the Church today, were both beheaded in Nam Dinh on that same August 1, 1838. Dominic belonged to the order of preachers, the Dominicans. Bernard was a diocesan priest, already quite elderly. Both men exercised their ministry in northern Vietnam during the severe persecutions of Emperor Minh Mang, whose policies saw Christianity as a direct threat to the political unity of the kingdom. Arrested precisely for being priests and for continuing to serve underground communities, both were subjected to intense pressure to abandon their faith, and both refused, despite the real difference in age and vocation between them. The foundation of the Church's recognition is exactly that: both men accepted death rather than renounce the priesthood. They were included among the 117 martyrs of Vietnam, canonized by St. John Paul II in 1988. Dominic and Bernard are remembered together, and their story teaches something beautiful. Faithfulness to God doesn't depend on age, experience, or years in vocation, it only depends on the decision not to abandon what you believe. By the 20th century, 11 religious sisters would make, together, a promise none of them ever imagined they would actually have to keep. This is Blessed Maria Stella of the Blessed Sacrament and her 10 companions, known as the Martyrs of Nowogródek, Sisters of the Congregation of the Sisters of the Holy Family of Nazareth. They lived in Nowogródek, then in eastern Poland, caring for education, the sick, and entire families across the region. After Soviet and then Nazi occupation, in July 1943, about 120 local people, mostly fathers of families, were arrested. Facing that, the sisters told their own chaplain that, if a sacrifice was needed, they wished to offer their own lives so the prisoners could return to their families, and they even offered to die in place of the parish priest himself. Summoned by the Gestapo on July 31, they were held overnight and, in the early morning of August 1, 1943, were shot in a forest near Nowogródek. The prisoners they had offered themselves for were, in fact, spared or only sent to forced labor. St. John Paul II beatified them in 2000, recognizing both martyrdom out of hatred for the faith and the extraordinary charity of that collective offering. They're remembered together, and their story proves that love for one's neighbor, carried to its final consequence, can save lives even at the cost of one's own. In a very different way, another saint of this day lived 15 centuries before those sisters, in a city that would guard his memory for generations. This is Saint Felix of Gerona, a Christian martyr killed during the persecution of Diocletian, probably between the years 303 and 305, in what is now Spain. The oldest literary account of him appears in the early 5th century, written by the Christian poet Prudentius, who already referred to Felix as the glory of Gerona, proof of how quickly and how deeply his memory had already spread through the region. The archaeology of the basilica dedicated to him confirms this exceptional antiquity of devotion. An entire community preserved the memory of this martyr since the earliest centuries of Christianity. Later traditions, written centuries afterward, present him as a young merchant from North Africa who evangelized Gerona before suffering various torments, details that shaped popular devotion, but that don't carry the same historical weight as the well-documented central fact: a Christian named Felix was killed there, and venerated ever since without interruption. The basilica bearing his name became a center of pilgrimage, and he remains a historical co-patron of the city to this day. Felix is remembered, above all, as proof that a faithful community can preserve a living memory for more than 1,500 years. In Nazi-occupied Poland, a simple parish priest would pay with his own life for refusing to abandon his community. This is Blessed Alexei Sobasek, born in 1895 and who died at the Dachau concentration camp on August 1, 1942. Ordained a priest in 1919, he worked as an assistant priest and teacher before becoming parish priest of Siedelman in 1931, paying special attention to the religious instruction of local children. When Nazi Germany invaded Poland in 1939, it unleashed a systematic elimination of religious leaders across the occupied territories, but Alexei stayed close to his parish community despite the growing danger surrounding him every single day. The Gestapo arrested him in October 1941, and after passing through a transit prison, he was registered at Dachau, a camp that held thousands of priests, mostly Polish, subjected to starvation, forced labor, and constant violence. Alexei died there, weakened by the inhumane conditions imposed on the prisoners. He was beatified in 1999, together with 108 other Polish martyrs of the Second World War. Alexei is remembered for his quiet priestly perseverance, and his life teaches that staying beside those who need us, even when it costs everything, is one of the most concrete forms of love that exists. In the England of King James I, a simple schoolmaster would be executed in the most brutal manner reserved for supposed traitors of the crown. This is Blessed Thomas Welborn, a Catholic layman born near Scarborough, in Yorkshire, and executed in York on that same August 1, 1605. During that period, penal laws treated certain practices of Catholic faithfulness, and simple refusal of the crown's religious supremacy, as serious political crimes. Welborn taught, and alongside another layman, sought to strengthen his neighbors in the Catholic faith, an activity that, on its own, was already enough to be tried for high treason. Convicted, he was executed according to the punishment reserved for traitors, hanging, disembowelment, and quartering, in public. The Church's recognition interprets his death as true martyrdom, because the political accusation, in practice, concealed a demand that he abandon his own faith. It's worth being clear here, his execution happened months before the famous gunpowder plot, and he should never be linked to that later conspiracy. He was beatified in 1929, together with 107 other martyrs of England and Wales. Welborn is remembered as an ordinary lay educator who publicly held on to his faith in a hostile legal environment, and his life teaches that courage sometimes doesn't need grand speeches, it just needs to refuse to deny what you believe. And we close today's August 1st journey by going back to 14th-century Italy, with the quiet life of a simple Augustinian lay brother. This is Blessed John Bufalari of Rieti, born in the early 14th century in Castel Porciano, in Umbria, and who died in Rieti, also on an August 1st. While still young, John entered the hermits of St. Augustine and lived at the convent of Rieti for the rest of his life, never once holding a prominent position within the order. The accounts of his life are late and brief, but they agree on a few clear traits: genuine humility, constant joy, deep prayer, and total availability for the simplest tasks around the convent. He served guests and fellow brothers, personally cared for the sick, and always sought the peace of his own community, living Augustinian spirituality in the silence of everyday life rather than through any public gesture. In 1832, Pope Gregory XVI officially confirmed his immemorial cult, a recognition equivalent to beatification. John is remembered, to this day, for the constancy of a quiet and charitable religious life, sustained by decades of silent faithfulness. And with that story, we close today's 10 Saints. If any of these lives touched your heart, subscribe here to Saint of the Day, comment asking one of these saints to intercede for someone you love, and share this video with anyone who might need to hear this message today. Every share like that is truly a small act of evangelization. And remember, the full prayer to each of these saints is right here in the video description.